Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the the final session of the Systems and Workflow Bootcamp. I'm joined by Darren from Fathom. We'll be doing an introduction shortly. Just do me a favor, whilst we're waiting for a few more people to join, if you can just go find the chat box located at the bottom of Zoom. If you've been in any of the other sessions so far today, you should know exactly where that is. And just drop me a quick comment in there and let me know what's been the biggest thing you've learned or the best thing that you've learned so far during the Systems and Workflow Bootcamp today. Just be interested to know what some of you have learned. Eleanor, it's all been very useful. Thank you very much, Eleanor. Eleanor, if I'm not mistaken, you're based in Australia, so this must be rather late for you right now. So thank you very much for staying up late to join us. That's very much appreciated. James says the Pixie integration with Zama. Sean says how we can improve our onboarding service. Ashley says I was in the last two sessions. Welcome again, Ashley. Thanks for joining us. Jamie, it's all been very useful. Great recap and some great ideas. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, some of it's not going to be new, some of it might be new, but often hearing the same things over and over again, it takes a few times before it clicks and suddenly you go, oh yeah, that's why I need to do that. Katie says, loving the AML integration. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. I'm going to kick things off in a second. This is the final session of the day, advisory systems with Darren. So far, we've looked at marketing systems, how you actually attract your ideal clients. Then we moved on to James Ashford talking about how you can sell to these prospects and convert them and price them appropriately. In the last session just now with myself and Jacques, we looked at how you then onboard these clients effectively, get all the information from them, set them up for success, and also set you guys up for success. And what we're going to be looking at now is how you actually manage those relationships going forward from an advisory capacity. So how do you deliver that timely and practical advice to your clients? Couple of housekeeping rules before we get started. Nothing you haven't heard before, I'm sure. Mute your phone, close your emails, lock your door, and focus, please. Make the most of the time here today to get the most out of it. If you have any questions at all, please can you put those in the Q&A box? It just makes it easier to keep track because the chat box is like a constant feed of messages, which are great to see, by the way. But the Q&A box is just easier to tick off specific questions. If you haven't already, please get social using the hashtag right there, hashtag Systems and Workflow Bootcamp. And then last but not least, don't forget to hang around until the end because we do have some workflow templates available for you to help get you guys started. Cool. Without further ado, then, I'd like to introduce our fourth speaker of today. We have Darren Glanville. He's the country manager at Fathom, and he's going to be sharing with you client advisory systems, what you need to actually deliver timely and practical advice to your clients. So, Darren, over to you.
Thank you. Can I just say thank you very much to everyone who's joined. Really pleased to kind of see everyone's kind of sticking around for the last session of what must be a really in-depth, informative set of sessions. So I appreciate that, and I believe we've got someone from Perth as well in Australia, so it must be uber late for them. So I'll try to make this as interactive as I can. Just going to share my screen. So if you could just give me a big thumbs up, just to let me know that you can all see my screen, would be amazing. Just give me a yes in the chat panel, that would be great. Thank you very much. And there are some panelists here that I recognize from my previous incarnations within other organizations as well. So awesome to be here. Very proud to be presenting on behalf of Fathom. If you didn't know anything about Fathom, we've been established since 2010. One of the very early entrants into the Zero ecosystem. And essentially what we do is we provide really easy, very simply to achieve powerful reporting, forecasting and analysis for small businesses and accountants. And that's essentially what we do. And you can find more information about that on our website. For me, if you've not met me previously, you've not spoken to me, I'm Darren Glanville, the country manager. I've recently joined Fathom. Prior to joining Fathom, I was actually in practice for 3 years, working with a independent practice based in the northeast of the UK, who previously won 0 awards for being fastest growing partner of the year. So everything we've done has been really driven from a tech perspective. We embraced the cloud early on. We recognized the challenges and the opportunities that was going to bring. So we made a decision to do that. And one of the reasons I wanted to come and join Fathom was to really bring some of that learning from practice into the space. But prior to going into practice, I was also one of the senior account managers at Xero, so I was with them from 2010 through to 2015. So I've worked with a lot of accountants around how they can start their digital journey and transforming that. This is probably really timely for us as well, delivering this boot camp with Pixie today, because literally a couple of days ago we launched a blog piece which you can go and find on our blog just by having a look, and it's all about resources for designing and delivering advisory services. And I believe even some of the panelists here have contributed to that as well. So not only do we have the resources and the blog for our main website, but we also have a sister platform that's called Advisable. If you just type in your Google search bar, Advisable by Fathom, you should come across that, but I will drop a link in there as well. And what we have in here are essentially 6 guides. These are our 6 pillars that we often refer to when talking to our partners around how they can really leverage the most from advisory services. So this will come into play and talk around things such as how to, what services you can be offering to your clients. Not only that, but how you can build your processes around that, how you price those services. And I think that's very relevant, obviously, having heard from James earlier. How to market, and again, obviously the work that Amanda's done with the sessions with you earlier, that will be very relevant as well. And again, the type of tech that we need, and education. And I think education is really important, not just internally for staff members that we have, but also externally with our clients. So please take a look at those. And as I say, that it's not just us as a vendor telling you how we view the world. These are actually stories from some of our partners and also other accountants who are not necessarily partners with Fathom, but the key learnings that they've brought. So I would urge you to go and take a look at some of those. I think we're stating the obvious here. I think one of the things that I often end up talking to accountants about, and certainly have done over the last kind of 5 months, is how's 2020 played out. And I think we would all acknowledge in our own ways that 2020 changed everything. I remember being in practice, watching COVID unfold from this. Absolutely, I'll share the links to the guides later for you. I'm just seeing that in the chat panel. We were sitting there as a passive viewer watching this unfold in the early part of 2020, and come the 23rd of March, we were like you, no different. We had to transition every one of our staff members to working from home, working remotely. We had the same challenges. We had to make sure that kit was available. We had to make sure that the telephone systems were all in place, but equally, and most importantly, next to making our staff safe, was how can we continue to serve our clients and not have a degradation in performance. And that was huge for us. Fortunately, we'd already done a lot of the heavy lifting. We changed our systems into cloud-based practice management systems. We'd helped other firms, ironically, throughout the year, but in 2019, but coming into 2020, even I remember working with a practice in London, helping them to implement a practice management system in January that then was going to go live at the beginning of April, and we helped them to finalize that. So we absolutely know the challenges. But one of the things we saw, and I think it's interesting that we see a lot of this new language coming into our lexicon, and I think certainly in the UK, your payroll teams have been worked tirelessly and relentlessly over the last 12 months. New words have come into our lexicon: furlough, pivot, all of the usual stuff that's come through. And I think one of the things that we saw as a direct result of practice was a much higher demand for advisory style services. Not just the traditional cash flow tools, but more in-depth planning, KPI measurement. We saw a huge upturn in those services, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And I think again, coming into Fathom, we certainly saw that being borne out by some of the reports that we saw being run. And I just thought I'd share this with you that for us as an organization, there was a huge uplift. Now, I'm not talking about forecasts at this point. This is purely management reports, KPI reports, benchmark reports being run from our system. We saw a huge uptake in that. Over 200,000 reports were run in 2020. That equates to something like a report being produced every 2.4 minutes. So there was a huge upturn in that for us as an organization, as a vendor, but again, as a practice, we were seeing much higher demand from our clients to be able to service some of that. I think, this bears it out to a conversation I have with accountants all the time. And I'm going to put a quote up here, but I'm seeing this in one form or another across 2019, 2020, and into 2021. And that is, accountants saying to us day after day that their mission is to help their businesses, their clients' businesses thrive and not just survive. And I think that's very true. One thing I never like to make assumptions. So one of the things I'd love you to put in the chat panel is, where are you on your advisory journey right now? And think about that for a second. Where are you? Are you a firm, a practice that has absolutely nailed your service offering? You have people in place, you have the process in place, and probably this is essentially teaching you how to suck eggs. Or are you a practice that's maybe dipped a toe in the water, but are not sure whether it's right for you, or are you really just setting out on your advisory journey? I'd just love to see what the feedback is on that, because often what we see is people think they're drafting their advisory journey and their services, but they literally are just dipping it out in dipping the toe in the water. And I think when we look at what advisory is, the caveat to that is, when somebody talks to you about advisory, what do you think? What's the word that essentially comes to mind? Is it a particular service line, or are you looking at a much more broad spectrum of services? I'd be just keen to understand what your views there. I can see that a number of people are just coming through and saying they're starting out on that journey, which is absolutely fine. Traditional firm moving into advisory. Thanks for that, Sean. Service is there, but not the right people to deliver it. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Thank you for sharing that, Brendan. Broad spectrum of services. Sean, again, benchmarking seems to be extremely popular right now. Absolutely. When we often talk about advisory, people tend, I think, to automatically pigeonhole it to one of two things. That generally comes down to budgets and forecasts, and also maybe things like corporate finance, raising capital. And I think for us there's such a broad spectrum. I think this isn't just about cash flows. Cash flow are important. Setting budgets with our clients is important. But as we saw there, we saw, benchmarking is really important for a lot of firms, especially if you niche within a particular industry. There's a curiosity, there's a natural voyeurism by clients to kind of rank themselves against their peers within a particular industry. We're certainly seeing a rise in the use of KPIs and alerts for ourselves within reporting. Forecasting is the ubiquitous one, and again, that's really important. I think it's very topical because of what happened with COVID. Businesses needed that sense of security. They needed to have clarity. They needed to have certainty. They wanted to have options, and I'll come on to those in a moment. So we're certainly seeing a rise with that, but I also think we're starting to see a much deeper approach to advisory in terms of certain firms that I know I've spoken to are now dipping their toe into HR. They're dipping their toe more into wealth management and others. There's a question that popped up. Sean says, "What do you mean by alerts?" What I mean by alerts, Sean, is not just setting a KPI and agreeing that with the client, but it's actually saying when those, let's say, thresholds have been met. Let's say we wanted to see a 10%, we want to be alerted where there's a greater than 10% decrease in profitability that month. It's the system's pushing alerts back to us. That's essentially what we mean by that. And I think this is uber important for us, because overwhelmingly the themes that we saw coming out of 2020, as I said, were clients wanted three things. They wanted certainty, they wanted options, and they wanted accountability. And I think certainly the firms that recognize that and looked at their service offering and were able to deliver that have probably a little bit of a first mover advantage in some senses, and we'll dig into that in a moment. The interesting thing for me as well is this isn't something that is just done by large firms. It's not just something that's delivered by Big Four. We've seen lots and lots of small, traditionally sole practitioner firms, even bookkeepers, which you perhaps wouldn't automatically assume would deliver these services, now starting to differentiate themselves by digging into this a lot deeper and providing these services. Certainly around analysis, and certainly around forecasting as well. And obviously we know the implications of that. I think when we look at forecasting specifically, this can be a difference between a company making payroll into the month or someone looking for more investment to strategically grow, and we'll come on to that as well. So I think we've certainly seen a rise in that, and I think it's interesting that a lot of you are looking at your advisory journey, and we'll hopefully look at that as well. But don't think this is something that's just something that the larger firms can offer. You can scale this quite interestingly. And I think that's one of the key challenges. When we talk to firms, we often see three key sets of challenges, if you like. The first one is scalability, and I think when we look at scalability, that's do we have the right service? Have we segmented our clients? There's lots of things that play into how we can make a scalable service from this. Often what I hear when I talk to practitioners about this is who can actually deliver it. And I think that's a very interesting point, because you generally don't get bottlenecks at the bottom. That's why it's there. It's generally at the upper levels of the organization where you have the bottleneck, because at that level you've got people with the right level of skill set to be able to deliver it. I think the second thing here is engagement. How can we continue to engage the customer in this service? How do we market that service to the client? And how do we set the right level of cadence? These are all things we need to consider. And I think the final thing here is, how do we create a great experience for the client so that they want this? How do we make it so that we can deliver a service that's profitable for us, has the most impact, and hooks the client in? The one thing I dread to hear is those times when we talk to accountants and say, I've lost clients because they didn't realize, my client didn't realize I could deliver this service and deliver it well. And I think that's such a shame when we hear that. And again, please, if any of this resonates with you and you've had experiences where you've lost clients because they don't feel or believe that you can offer that service, let me know, because I think that there are certain things we can help you with in terms of how you market those. And I think when we look at scalability, and some of you have already mentioned this in the comments, is it's hard to find the right tools. And trust me, having worked in the ecosystem, having worked for Xero as well, and having worked in practice, I absolutely understand it's a nightmare for you to look at a raft of over 900 tools within the ecosystem to try and find the right one for you. And I think what we've tried to do is really bring this back to being fit for purpose. And again, going back into practice, we used to suffer with what I would call shiny thing-itis. The latest app that would come out, we'd go chasing after it. We'd embed it, we'd try it. And what we found was it wouldn't be sticky. And we ended up in a process where that was done more often than not. Again, if you've tried that and you've suffered with that yourselves, let me know. One of the things that we had to do early on was recognize that apps, as much as they're brilliant, they don't necessarily, there isn't a one size fits all for this. So one of the things that we looked at was the two levels of client that we had, the needs that they had, who was our ideal client profile. And you may well have heard some of this from Amanda as well earlier, around really drilling into your ideal client profile, your client personas. What were the service levels that we really wanted to deliver to them? And for some of those, we found that some of them wanted to focus on operational cash flow or the direct method, or indirect method, or direct method. And others wanted to focus on a much more strategic view, and some actually wanted both. So for those guys, what we ended up doing was really looking at using two tools. One is where we can give the client access to a tool like Float or Fluidly, and letting them focus on, if they wanted to play out different scenarios with invoices coming out of Xero or QBO, that was fine. But we would then focus on delivering a much more strategic vision using tools like Fathom, and we would mesh that nicely with them, and that kind of fit our area because we were able to offer the best of both worlds. So for some clients, we were able to say, hey, you're worried about hitting cash flow for payroll at the end of the month. Great, we can see that through the short-term stuff because we've got the invoices coming in and feeding into this. But what about when this is over? And I think Jordan did something really, really good the other day when he put the post out saying, you never recognize there's a problem until there's a fire. And you never want the lifeboat until the ship is sinking. And that's something we recognized early on, was not just to focus on the short term, but actually look at the longer strategic vision of that client and where they wanted to go. So we actually looked at implementing a number of apps that helped us fit that. The second thing we did was to make this scalable, was to look at what the process was and how frequently. So for us, there was a minimum level of quarterly that we would embed through our management reporting, and the reviewing the budgets would fit in there as well. But we also recognized that this wasn't a case of compliance or advisory. The two went hand in hand, and I think sometimes that's something else that often gets confused. Is everyone's saying you've got to move into advisory. Absolutely, advisory is where it needs to be, but we also need the compliance. So what we wanted to do, and you would have heard people like Will Farnell talk about this many times before, was we have to own the bookkeeping to enable us to appreciate the benefits of the automation, so that we can free up more time to take on either more compliance-based clients or give us opportunities to start to sell advisory services. We also needed to recognize that we had to internally educate our teams, not just on the product, but we had to upskill them. We had to upskill them in terms of soft skills. So again, without sounding detrimental, accountants from experience have never been brilliant salespeople. Jordan, I don't know if there's a comment on that you want to make, but they haven't. Business development for a lot of people is scary. We've probably all had a bad experience, working with certain business development people. And I think, yes, as a professional, there's lots more we could do, work from a sales perspective in terms of doing that much better and giving people a much richer experience. But I do think that there are some of the softer skills that we can introduce. This isn't just about being a great technician, and there's lots of them out there. I've worked with them. But what we've also needed to start looking at was not just someone who could understand the numbers, but again, just hold a conversation with someone about that. It's not just about putting some observations into a report. It's really the nitty-gritty of being able to open up that conversation, asking a lot of open questions as opposed to the traditional closed questions that drove that. So we invested quite a lot in upskilling that. So that's really important for us. So education of that was really good. I think the second thing we looked at was engagement. And I think the biggest thing that we did, and I mentioned this before, was really look at our client base and segment it. Who were the clients that were likely to benefit the most? Where could we have the most impact for the least effort? What were the commonalities between those clients? Because again, that fed into things like benchmarking with those clients as well, where we could offer another layer of service, but also how we marketed to this. And I think this comes back to how we set our stall out from day one. And this is interesting for us. And I think, when you look at advisory, there's been a lot of people saying, give your clients a report for free. I don't subscribe to that. And here's the reason why. The reason I don't believe that just giving someone a report works is that the client sees no value in that. If we're giving something away for free, whether that's a one-off or over a period of 3 months, we're setting that psychological level that there's no value to it. It's free. And generally what we've seen is people have printed it on 80 GSM paper out of the photocopier from the printer at home and given that to the client, and that really doesn't stick. There's no value proposition. And I think what we then set ourselves up for potentially is a little bit of it's a harder climb, because now we're trying to then to increase the value of it. So my first thing is never sell a report. Sell the service that you're wrapping around that. That would be my number one piece of advice. Sell the service that you're wrapping around, not the report. And it's kind of oxymoronic, but we as accountants, we've almost become snake oil salespeople to a point of selling product. We're selling an app, and we think an app is going to solve the problem. It's not. The value proposition is the advice, the context we can wrap around that. So we found that by positioning that right from the start and setting the expectations quite clearly at the point of engagement and onboarding, that we would build the value into those services much more easily. And I think certainly if you're using tools like GoProposal, you can certainly build that in. And again, just fitting that into your Pixie workflows we can automate a lot of that and make it a lot better for them. So essentially, we're educating clients from the off around why we're doing this, the importance of that, and the benefit that they would get from the back end. We'd also set the cadence. So again, we remind them of the cadence of that. And again, some of you may be using tools like the Gap. Again, the Gap is great because it formulates that and brings it into a clear blueprinted process, including things like webinar slides, forms, emails, and other documents that you can send to your clients, have them fill in for things like your complimentary client review meeting or your gloss review, and then set the cadence within that. So if you haven't looked at tools like the Gap, take a look at those as well, because we're seeing a lot of firms use those. Then it becomes about experience, and for us, it was never about specifying this as a one and done approach, and that was critical to us. We didn't just want this to be something we picked up once a year. We did a forecast. Yes, we would do that, but we wanted to instill this on a much more regular basis, and give us the opportunity to then upsell. Maybe they did the bookkeeping themselves. We could take that process on, and then bring that in house. The other thing it gave us was feedback loops. So we could, by setting the right level of cadence, we weren't then falling back on this whole process of using it, maybe a survey once a year, asking it generally when we'd send a bill out traditionally, as a lot of people have done. We'd actually get feedback on a much more regular basis and use things like NPS, Net Promoter Scores, customer satisfaction scores at those engagements, and even down to customer effort scores. We used to use a tool called Customer Sure that we'd send out an electronic survey, and you've seen them all. You've had interactions online where you've seen the questionnaire that says, out of a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend insert your name of your practice here to a friend or colleague? And we would view that, and we would get a regular, 3 times a year NPS score from our clients. Every time we had an engagement like a forecast, we would send a customer satisfaction score, and even down to things like, how easy have we made it to give you the information that you want through a customer effort score? And that gives us a constant feedback loop that we can then tweak the service. So it's never about one and done for us. I think the other thing as well is we absolutely tied the advisory services back to the outcome that the client wanted. And some of this came back again through the education piece of how we worked with staff to get them opening conversations up with clients, moving the conversation away from an email, which is interesting at the moment. Again, I think it's naturally evolved that we seem to be communicating an awful lot through email. Yes, we have things like Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, etc. But a lot of interaction we found ended up coming on email. So what we wanted to do was try and break that and move it away from an asynchronous conversation to a much more synchronous conversation with our clients. And so obviously that helped because we'd already started using Zoom to have some remote meetings with clients where we couldn't physically go out, or there was a huge time saving there, and it was worthwhile that for the client. We started using tools like Loom to record our reports and our interpretation of those reports, and then share the Loom video with the client. And it was interesting for us as well to see clients then watching those Loom videos and then commenting and asking questions. I do specifically remember one particular client saying, "Thanks very much, that was awesome, but at 4 minutes 40 into that recording, you said this, could you please explain that?" And that, again, just gave us a different edge to being able to interact with our clients. It was a lot more synchronous. And I think we've naturally seen a movement towards that. And I think there was a great webinar the other day by Joe, David, and Dave Selleck around tools that they were using. And one of the tools that they've started using, certainly Dave Selleck has, is Notion. So Notion is effectively a web page builder, if you want, and you can embed questions, notes, comments, videos, PDFs in there, and they're sharing that through with their clients to have a much more collaborative process around that. So again, we're seeing the rise of tools such as that. And I think that comes back to the outputs. Once we can agree what the client wants, and we'll come a little bit onto that in a moment, what's the output that we're giving them, whether that's a PDF, whether they want to view that online. whether they want that as a printed report or a printed forecast, we have to think about how our client is going to consume this. And there are obviously industries where much more dashboard style information is going to be relevant. They want to view that online, but equally some like to, have that tangible, that tactile view of a printed report. Others are quite happy to view through a PDF, but what's the mechanism that we can talk them through that? Whether that's using tools like Teams and Zoom, how do we articulate that? And what are they actually getting? And one of the things that I often see, sadly, is when we're doing reports and we're trying to sell value, we do print it on standard 80 GSM paper. And the impact that can be slightly had just by printing it on slightly thicker paper, 120 GSM, glossy finish, pretty pictures, pretty graphs, all the analysis that's there. When you hand that to someone and they literally, you see it in the boardroom, and hopefully we get back to that sooner rather than later, the moment they touch that, there's a feeling of value. It's think back to that experience that we all had when opening an Apple product, for example. Yes, it's great to rip the phone out and start playing with the new features, but the experience that most people feel is that initial touch, that initial feel that you suddenly go, wow, it's the unboxing of that. And I think, your brands are vitally important to you. You're growing a brand. Why not make the most of that and embed your brand within the report and make it something that looks special and that you're proud of, to do that. So think seriously about your outputs and what you're doing. The other aspect here is what I often see, and this is, I think we're getting into the fundamentals of advisory, irrespective of what that is always around impact versus effort. And what we often see, and this is why I'm so curious as to, where you're at within your journey, is we often see people focusing on low effort, quite rightly, but it's having low impact. And this is generally where people fire reports out to clients in the hope that some client will buy it. We're throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I would say, by all means, if you want to do that. I don't think that's a long-term scalable solution for you. I think it's a short-term blip. Let's try and win as much business off this as the back of it, but we haven't really thought through our service offering. The key for me is we don't want to be doing high effort, low impact, low return. That's just a no-no. But the line there gets very blurred when we look at low impact, low effort. But high impact, high effort, low impact is certainly an area we need to stay away from on your traditional 2x2 matrix. The areas that generate most of the impact and the return for you is where we have the most impact for low effort. So again, it comes back to automation. How can we automate a lot of what we do? And one of the things that we do in Fathom is we can schedule reports. So again, if we're looking at a report for a client, once we agree that, what we're able to do is schedule that report. So 4 days after the month end, we can automate an email that goes to the client and says, hey, Mr. Client, your report is now available for you to view online. We can do that quarterly if we need to. So again, we can template reports. Once we have a practice template developed, we can then automate that. We can copy those templates across multiple clients. We can even set narrative that pulls that data in automatically from zero. So it's going to look at those figures that we want. So revenue, for example, you set a placeholder, it pulls the data in automatically. The commentary you can preset, but the numbers will change. And again, you can set variances on that as well. So automation is the key there. And that's why we see people producing, 200,000 reports in a year, because they've really nailed the level of automation. They've got their branding on that, and it just leaves a great impression in their customers' mouths. There is another caveat to this, and that's where we need to put a higher level of effort in that has another high level of impact. That's really where you get a high level of fee. I won't necessarily say it's a right level of ROI, because we're putting a higher level of effort into to achieve that. But as a natural consequence, the more effort we put in, the higher the impact, the higher the fee that we can charge for that. But so there are still areas that we can still automate around that end up having a that's having the impact that we want. Obviously, when we're looking at automation, and I think there's a question there that's come through from Elevate, if the systems send automatic reports, how can we be sure that the basis of that is correct? Are they booked up to date? Absolutely. We need to bake in those processes. And I think that comes back to what I was saying before, is if we bake in the process, that the numbers are up to date, we've reviewed them, we're giving ourselves that flexibility, we can review the report before it gets to the client, it's still there, but the process is automated. Of advising the client. It's not something then we'd have to download into an email and send to them. There are other areas, Eleanor, that we can work on with that. But you're absolutely right, and that's ubiquitous across any system. If the books aren't up to date, we're going to have that whole estimate of crap in and crap out. So that's what we need to remove from the equation. But I think we can do that if we bake in the right level of process that we have. And I think that comes back to what we were saying before, is, bringing this into the fundamentals. All we're doing with advisory is looking at where the client is now, where they want to get to, and then building our plan of how we're going to help them get to that and monitor that. We certainly saw that, and it's borne out by the conversations that we're having, is that people want options and they want accountability. And by doing that, they want to see the impact of decisions they make before they make them. So there's lots of other areas here that we're impacting on. So it's not just about doing a report or a KPI. It's actually looking at things like goal seeking. If you're achieving this level of profitability and you want to get to X, what are the 3 or 4 things that we can change? We've had goal seek within Fathom for a while now. It's then looking at forecasting and saying, hey, there's 3 or 4 events here. And so what we've built into forecasting now is something called micro forecasts, which are, think of them as individual events that we can say, okay, when we can group them by title. So for example, if we want to look at this in terms of HR or employees, we can set a category. We can then say, okay, over the next 12 months, I want to employ 10 members of staff. Those 10 people are going to incur assets that we need to buy. So that can be computer equipment, it could be vehicles. There could be loans that we need to take out to fund those vehicles. So we can discreetly add in all of those elements to create these events, these micro forecasts within our main forecast itself. Now, what we can then do is we can sit with the client and we can talk them through all of those options. So we can say, okay, let's make a decision on a best case scenario of everything going through, and this is the impact you'll see on your numbers. But what's the worst case scenario? Maybe we can only take on 2 members of the team, 2 vehicles, and therefore we need fewer loans. We can model that and move those events around on a calendar, and then see the impact that has, and then include that business snapshot, that business roadmap into the reporting, and build in that accountability. So next month, this is what we said we're going to do. Have you done it? Yes or no? We've built that narrative into the report. That's really where the power of this comes out. And I think that's important. I know your comments there. We absolutely have to. We have to make sure that the numbers are correct, coming from the GL. And that's fundamentally what we're doing, is as long as the numbers are coming from the GL, and I think, yes, we can automate bank statement transactions coming in. We've got prepayments and accruals. They should be coming into the system as well. This is why I think we're seeing so many people now start to own the bookkeeping process. They're nailing that down. Will Parnell, I think, an account at Xerocon a couple of years ago, was talking about building in daily bookkeeping, which is enabling that then can help them focus on delivering great advisory services off the back of that as well. So interesting to see that. I think from that, what are the key messages we're seeing? It's about creating financial and non-financial KPIs and measuring what it really matters to the client. It's about visualizing that. Pictures speak 1,000 words, so I absolutely need to look at that. Modeling those future events and making sure that they fit with the desired outcomes that the client wants. Whether that is simply to pay for a holiday at the end of the year, that family holiday. I think that's very topical for a lot of people at the moment around coming out of the restrictions for COVID, paying for that holiday, paying their mortgage off early, whether it's looking at exit planning, whether it's looking at capital introduction, financing, or even just making payroll. What are those outcomes that we want to work with them on? We've seen some amazing stories from our partners and from our direct customers who are saying that they felt that their businesses have been saved as a result of having to have the first time a full set of visuals on this that were easy to understand. We've seen accounting partners really make a difference, and I think that goes unsaid with everything else that you've done over the last 12 months. We certainly see a rise in people looking at ranking and benchmarking, not just benchmarking, but ranking their clients anonymously within their vertical markets or their specializations or niches. We've seen certainly a rise in the ability to consolidate accounts as well through our tool. And again, there's a lot of automation that we've built into the tool, and I'm certainly happy to take you through more of that on a separate discussion if anyone's interested in doing that. But again, don't underestimate the power of education for the team. We're really pleased that recently we've introduced certification on Fathom as a tool to really help you, your staff, get the most from it. But equally, as I said at the beginning, advisable, a platform where we're taking industry information from your peers and helping to regurgitate that so you can learn from those who have already been there, done it, worn the t-shirt, and have a look at that. If there's questions, we'll take them, come through. But I think there's a question there from Connor. What are your thoughts about VFD as a solution? It's not something I've really come across, to be honest. Again, I think you need to look at that as your client, to tick all of the boxes, choose the right solutions for you and the clients. I think that's fundamentally what it is. We think we've got something pretty special with Fathom, but we have to be honest. We don't do the direct method of forecasting. We do indirect. For us, it's about giving you that ability to look at that. We often say to people, if they come to us and say, "Hey, do you do short-term forecasting?" The answer is simply no. There's some great tools with Fluidly and Float. Please take a look at those guys. They do that better than we would. It's not a space we want to get into, but what we also want to do is help you have more strategic conversations with your clients. I think the other thing for us is, again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all process. We want you to scale, absolutely. We want to support you as you scale these services, and I can sit here and wax lyrical for hours around, how we embed advisory for you. This isn't something we're going to cover up in a 45-minute webinar, but certainly we can take a look at some of those. We run regular webinars. If you want more information, I'm more than happy to dive on a 30-minute discovery call for any of you that really wants us to have a look at that. So I'm more than happy to do that. But I think I'll certainly take some questions from the audience if that's what they want.
Perfect. Darren, thank you very much for that. That was incredibly insightful. Thank you for sharing that. There were a few questions in the Q&A box. I'm not sure if you've covered off some of these already. There's an interesting one here around how can accountants compete with business advisors and coaches who already are flooding the market with their templates and services with much better marketing and selling skills?
Well, that's an awesome question. How can you compete with business advisors, coaches who are already flooding the market with their template services? I think number one is who has the relationship. Number one, who already has the existing relationship. I think we often downplay that. It's a lot easier. And again, if you go on any selling courses, James will probably say this, Amanda would say it, Jordan, you probably would, that it's so much easier to sell new services to an existing client than to sell completely new services to new clients. They're having to do all the legwork. The other thing I would look at is look at what they're saying. If you feel that that's resonating with your clients, how can you take that and spin it for you? That would be the other way. I remember many years ago when KPMG first came into the small business market, and this was really interesting for us. So KPMG entered the small business market. It was a big announcement. Lots of people in the market suddenly said, "Oh, well, that's it, game over. We should shut up shop now. We can't compete." The thing for me was, that's great because they're now doing their marketing, your marketing for you. Because they're now highlighting all the stuff that you can do, but you have this benefit of being agile. You can iterate on what your process is, and you can deliver those services as long as you're confident you have the skill set and the ability to deliver. So I would take that I would look at what's being successful for them, and I would regurgitate it. And I'd work with somebody like Amanda and others to get your messaging right around that, if you feel that's something.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be like the first to the party to discuss these things. Like if the first time your client is hearing about all this advisory stuff that can be possible is from some coach on Facebook who's selling some course, then they're going to come to you and say, well, why haven't you talked to me about this in the past? Because we've got a good relationship and you helped me with all my financials. So having that conversation with them, being the first to have the conversation, it doesn't matter if they don't work with you right there and then to do it. The fact that you've asked them the question and had that conversation means that you've got in there first. So if anyone else comes along, they know that you've already tried to cover that off.
Excuse me. I think there's also another case here is don't be dismissive of also working with people who can enhance your service offering. It may actually not be something that you want to do, but there could be people that you could work with, partner with, to help you deliver those services. So don't shut your mind off to that. There's potentially a conversation that you could have where they're delivering that, and there's some form of return for you, but you're again not tying yourself down to being able to deliver that service. But I absolutely, Jordan, I can agree. Be first to the marketplace and get that.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to the old Xero and QuickBooks thing. Like the last thing you want is your client to come to you and say, I've seen this QuickBooks advert on the telly. What's that all about? You need to get in there first. There's another good question here. What levels or size of business or level of complexity does the business need for this to be useful?
I think essentially that's again, it's a good question. We used it on some super simple businesses and some very complex businesses. What I find really funny, sometimes it does bring a smile to my face when we talk to a lot of partners around engaging with Fathom for the first time, or even other apps. Often what people do is they look at bringing in the most complex, difficult client with this approach of, well, if it can work for that client, it can work for everyone. And what happens sometimes is that it doesn't work. There's always a little nook, there's a little cranny that doesn't quite fit, and I believe it tarnishes the whole process. So what ends up happening is you then dismiss it. And what we should be focusing on is again comes back to where can we have the biggest impact for the minimal amount of effort. So there's going to be those smaller clients where you can just give them a much more enhanced management report from the stuff that you would pull traditionally from Xero or QBO. But it starts to introduce things like key performance indicators within their industry. Now that would immediately set my spidey sense thinking, well, how do I compare? There's a different conversation. So we did stuff with micro businesses, and I think, advisory is a very broad topic. I know there are people on this session that have sat there, you've delivered very in-depth technical advisory meetings, but at the other end of the spectrum, you've just sat there sometimes and listened to a business owner probably cry because they're worried about their relationship, their family, the business, their staff. And all you've done is listen to them and let them vent and be the natural empaths that you have. But we're also then kind of picking that out and saying, okay, how can I then help this person? We did a lot of business when I was in practice around helping real micro businesses, and it stunned me. Coming from the app world, coming in and thinking, hey, everyone's going to want forecasting and budgeting. I know that we did some work with a local business mentoring group, and it really opened my eyes to how many of those small business owners didn't even know how to pay themselves, what to pay themselves. And you can start to surface some of that for your smaller clients. And yes, you can scale that as it goes higher for your more complex clients as they grow and they mature. There's different ceilings of complexity, but we can start really small. So I would say it's across the whole range there, Jordan.
Okay, great. Look, if anyone's got any more questions, please stick them in the Q&A box now. I'm going to start to wrap things up, so I'm just conscious of time. Darren, if anyone's got any more questions for you after this session, where's the best place for them to reach you and get hold of you?
So the best place to reach me is just drop me an email, darren.glanville@fathomhq.com. You can get in touch with us by the website, tweet me, find me on LinkedIn. That's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a couple of links with everyone.
Yep.
So I'll drop these into the chat. So this is a link going into the chat now, which is our latest blog. So you can find out resources for designing and delivering advisory services there. Somebody wanted the guides to the link. So what I will do is I will put the link in there for our advisable platform. And again, there's a link in the top right-hand corner where people can take a look for those guides and download them. Again, as I said, we mentioned about talking about profiles and communication, and I did share this with Jordan just ahead of the thing. One of the things that you may find useful when you kind of think about clients and how you can talk to them is look at a little tool called Crystal Nose. That's really interesting. Crystal Nose is a nice little tool. And Jordan, I think you saw this yourself. This is actually really quite nice because, again, one of the things we found when we started to talk to clients is how do they communicate? What are their styles of communication? And this is a great way that you can connect with somebody via LinkedIn, find their DISC profile. Not only that, but you can get their insights in terms to how to pitch to them, how to demo to them, how to schedule a meeting. What are the kind of words, phrases? How do you need to conduct that? And it's a really useful tool. So please take a look at Crystal Nose.
It's scarily accurate as well. When Darren was showing me this earlier, I was just like, have you been speaking to my fiance? Like, how do you know so much about me? That's really, really interesting tool.
So yeah, I just got a message actually. I think it's people are struggling to see the links. I'll just drop them in for the attendees as well.
Yeah, the links are just in the chat box, guys.
Yeah, they're there for you. But yeah, reach out. I'm more than happy if people want 30 minutes kind of a chat. I'm more than happy to book that in with them. So reach out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'll just wrap things up very quickly, guys, just to remind you that we do have some workflow templates available for you to download. And actually, we have a heap of Fathom templates available on our template library here. So things for setting up KPI dashboards, forecasts, running brand new reports, adding companies into your Fathom account. You can download these, install them into your Pixie workspace to help save some of that time when you're using Fathom to manage the advisory conversations with your clients. So if you just head to the workflow template library, I'll drop the link in to the chat box for you as well. Then you can download these and use them in your Pixie workspace. And last but not least, obviously we spent a whole morning today. Some of you have been on every single session, which is incredible. Thank you very much. Looking at systems, workflows and processes. And if you are interested in learning how to map out your own processes and your own workflows, then we're hosting a workshop later this month. It's a workflow masterclass where we'll be really getting into the detail of how you can map out these processes and start to build them. So again, I'll just drop the link to that in the chat box. Oops. There we go. We finished today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for having you on as well, Darren. It's been really insightful.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone that's joined us in any of the sessions today. Really appreciate it. The recordings will be made available. Those will be available from tomorrow morning onwards. So I'll send you an email then to let you know that they're ready. And if you have any other questions in the meantime, please reach myself on LinkedIn or Darren by email or LinkedIn. And yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Thanks very much, everyone.
All right. Speak soon, everybody. Bye-bye.